Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire community decides to openly defy a divine command? It's a chilling thought, and today, we are diving into a powerful story from the scriptures that serves as a timeless warning. This is the tale of the people of the Sabbath, a story of faith, temptation, and a truly shocking consequence. Imagine a small town nestled by the sea. The people living there were part of the children of Israel, and their lives were deeply intertwined with the rhythm of the ocean. Their livelihood, their food, everything depended on the fish they caught. But they had a sacred covenant with God. One day of the week, the Sabbath, was to be a day of complete rest and worship. No work was allowed, and for this coastal community, that specifically meant no fishing. This was their sacred duty, a cornerstone of their faith. For 6 days they could work, but the seventh day was exclusively for God. It was a clear and simple rule. But God, in His infinite wisdom, decided to put their faith to the ultimate test. It was a test that would reveal the true state of their hearts and their commitment to His commands. Here's where the trial began. On the normal weekdays, when fishing was permitted, the sea was strangely quiet. The fishermen would cast their nets and wait for hours, often coming back with very little. It was a struggle. Their livelihood was becoming harder and harder to maintain. But then, as the sun set on Friday, preparing for the Sabbath, something miraculous and deeply tempting would happen. On the Sabbath day, the sea would come alive. Schools of fish, large and plump, would swarm near the shore. They swam right up to the surface, so close you could practically reach out and touch them. It was a spectacular sight, a bounty of fish that would make any fisherman's heart leap. But it was all happening on the one day they were forbidden to cast their nets. The contrast was stark and painful. Scarcity for 6 days, and an unbelievable abundance on the day of rest. Can you imagine the pressure? The whispers would start. Look at all those fish, just sitting there for the taking. The hunger of their families, the desire for wealth, the sheer frustration of it all began to gnaw at their resolve. The temptation grew stronger with each passing Sabbath. The people saw the fish taunting them, a feast just out of reach, and their patience started to wear thin. The test was proving to be almost unbearable. Finally, a group within the community decided they had had enough. They couldn't resist the lure of easy wealth any longer. But they didn't want to be seen as openly breaking the law. So, they hatched a clever, deceitful plan. They thought they could outsmart the divine command. Their scheme was this: on Friday evening, just before the Sabbath began, they would go down to the shore. They would set up their nets, dig channels and trenches from the sea, creating small pools along the coastline. When the fish swarmed in on Saturday, they would naturally swim into these channels and get trapped in the pools by the nets. The Sabbath breakers wouldn't touch them on the holy day. Oh no, they would wait. Then, as soon as the Sabbath ended and Sunday morning arrived, they would go down to the shore and simply collect the fish that were already trapped. In their minds, they weren't technically fishing on the Sabbath. They were just collecting what was already there. They celebrated their own cleverness, believing they had found a perfect loophole. They could enjoy the bounty of the Sabbath fish without, in their view, directly disobeying the command. Greed had clouded their judgment, and they thought their trickery would go unnoticed. But not everyone in the town was on board with this plan. The community split into 3 distinct groups. The first group, of course, were the transgressors, the ones who were actively setting the traps and deceiving themselves. The second group consisted of the righteous and devout believers. When they saw what their neighbors were doing, they were horrified. They knew this was a clear violation of God's law, a mockery of the Sabbath sanctity. They couldn't stay silent. They went to the Sabbath breakers and pleaded with them. They reminded them of their covenant with God, of the sacredness of the day of rest. They warned them, "Why do you disobey? Do you not fear the punishment that will come? What you are doing is a clear sin, a deception that will not be overlooked." They tried to reason with them, to appeal to their fear of God and their sense of duty. But the transgressors were blinded by their greed. They laughed off the warnings, telling the righteous to mind their own business. Then there was the third group. These people were passive observers. They didn't participate in the sin, but they didn't try to stop it either. They saw the transgressors setting their traps and the righteous trying to warn them, and they just shrugged. They said to the righteous believers, "Why do you bother advising a people whom God will surely punish or destroy? Your words are falling on deaf ears. It's useless." They had given up, believing the sinners were a lost cause. They chose silence and neutrality, detaching themselves from the moral struggle unfolding in their own community. So the scene was set. The sinners continued their deception week after week, growing richer and more arrogant. The righteous continued their warnings, separating themselves from the evil deeds. And the silent group simply watched from the sidelines, convinced there was nothing they could do. The tension in the town was thick. A divine judgment was looming, but only one group seemed to truly understand the danger they were all in. The righteous believers, fearing the coming wrath, made a crucial decision. They decided to physically separate themselves from the sinners. Some accounts say they built a wall to divide the town, creating a clear boundary between those who obeyed God and those who defied Him. They wanted to make it unequivocally clear that they had no part in this transgression. They had done their duty by warning the wrongdoers, and now they placed their trust in God and distanced themselves from sin. For a time, life went on. The Sabbath breakers enjoyed their ill-gotten gains, their tables overflowing with fish while they mocked the piety of their neighbors. They felt untouchable, convinced their clever trick had worked. The warnings had been ignored. The pleas had been dismissed. The lines had been drawn. The stage was set for the inevitable, divine response. Then, one morning, the righteous group woke up to a terrifying silence from the other side of the town. There was no noise, no movement. Cautiously, they went to see what had happened. They climbed the wall or went to the gates of the sinners' part of the town, and what they saw was a sight of pure horror. The streets were filled not with people, but with apes. God's punishment had been swift and absolute. Overnight, every man, woman, and child who had participated in the deception, or had been content with it, had been transformed. The transgressors, now in animal form, would sniff their old clothes and weep. It was a living nightmare, a punishment designed to be as psychologically tormenting as it was physically transformative. The arrogant, clever people who thought they could outsmart God were now reduced to chattering, screeching animals, a spectacle of humiliation for all to see. The righteous believers, witnessing this, were filled with a profound sense of awe and fear of God. They had been saved. Their faith, their courage to speak out against evil, and their decision to separate themselves from sin had protected them from this dreadful fate. As for the silent group, the ones who did nothing, the scriptures are less explicit about their fate, but many scholars believe that since they did not forbid the evil, they too were included in the punishment. The lesson is clear. Silence in the face of sin can be a form of complicity. The transformed people, the new apes, did not live long. After 3 days, they all perished. Not a single one of them survived. Their story, however, did not die with them. It was preserved as a powerful and enduring lesson, passed down through generations. It's a stark reminder of several crucial truths. First, that you cannot deceive God. Human schemes and loopholes are transparent to the Almighty. Second, it highlights the severe consequences of deliberately and persistently disobeying clear divine commands, especially when driven by greed. And third, it underscores the importance of standing for what is right, of speaking out against injustice and sin, even when it's unpopular or seems futile. The righteous were saved not just for their own piety, but because they fulfilled their duty to forbid evil. This story forces us to ask ourselves, in a similar situation, which group would we belong to? Would we be the ones trying to find loopholes for personal gain? Would we be the silent observers who feel it's not our problem? Or would we be the ones who have the courage to stand up and speak the truth, no matter the response? It's a question that's as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the story of the people of the Sabbath. If you found this story as powerful as I do, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content that explores these timeless lessons. And please, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your reflections on this incredible story. Until next time, stay curious and stay thoughtful.